Even worse, it wants you to believe that you're actually faking it, and one day the truth of your disqualification will come to the surface, embarrassing you and destroying your reputation. Welcome to Designed and Delivered for Destiny. I'm your host, Nicole Cherie. I'm a wife, author, life coach, business owner, and speaker. I've been a mental health therapist for over 10 years, and now I want to bring the conversations from my office and bring it to you wherever you are. Each episode, we will discuss various topics related to your design, your deliverance, or your destiny. I'm glad you're taking time out of your busy schedule to tune in. Let's jump in. Can we spend some time today talking about why it's okay that you're not qualified to do what God has called you to do? But really, that's why He chose you. We both know that if we were qualified, we would get all the glory and all the credit. But because we're not, He gets to shine bright like a diamond. Now, although we know that to be true, it doesn't negate the fact that there is this ubiquitous plague that overwhelmingly impacts so many people, which we know to be this thing called the Imposter Syndrome. This is the next obstacle we will address. It's one of those unwelcome, it's not even a guest, it's really like an intruder that creeps in and imposes on you and robs you of so many things in your life. Can we talk about what this imposter syndrome is actually about? I would like us to first look at a formal definition, and then I'll break it down the way that I generally like to do. So according to psychologist Susan Albers, she describes the imposter syndrome as the feeling that everyone else knows exactly what they're doing, but you feel lost. You have this fear that people around you are going to figure out that you don't know what you're talking about and expose you as a fraud. Statistically, 25 to about 30% of high achievers suffer from the imposter syndrome, and about 70% of people in general have experienced this at some point in life. So I would imagine that you personally have had this experience, or you know someone who has. Well, I want to suggest that we look at this as another one of those voices within you that needs to be uprooted. But this voice is challenging because it can be so convincing that it's good for you, and it's so easy to give in and allow it to remain. But let me tell you about this voice. Let's just talk about it to understand what's really going on and why it's actually affecting you. And as you may know by now, I like to emphasize the need to see internal challenges that you're having as a voice and not some type of intangible experience. So this particular voice, it knows you have goals, it knows you have a calling on your life, but this voice wants to give you all the reasons, all the body sensations to delay, to avoid, or just give up on your goal and your calling. You see, this voice is very cunning and intelligent. It knows that you will always need to depend on Jesus to accomplish your calling in life. But this voice wants you to feel bad about having to be dependent for the rest of your life. It wants you to hide the truth that you have flaws, that you have deficits. It causes you to magnify all your weaknesses so that you will believe that everyone will notice them and discredit you because of them. Even worse, it wants you to believe that you're actually faking it, and one day the truth of your disqualification will come to the surface, embarrassing you and destroying your reputation. So now you're living in fear. You refuse to move forward. You're avoiding all these opportunities that are coming your way. Does this sound familiar? It's so common that it's now become like a normal experience for so many people. The way I like to think about it, this voice, this imposter syndrome, it's like having your own internal AI system that has tried to calculate all your attributes, your strengths, your weaknesses, your failures, your success. It pulls data from what's happening in the world around you, and it's calculating what is the likelihood of you being successful if you pursue that goal or if you continue to pursue your calling. Now, this AI-like system isn't unbiased. It was programmed by a software engineer called fear and shame. So its underlying goal is to protect you from the perception of a threat to your reputation, your ego, your identity, or even your body. It wants you to avoid disappointment and failure and stress and the unknown. Now, some of you might be saying, that's great, Nicole. I want to avoid those things. I hear you. But the two quintessential problems with this AI voice is it wants you to avoid all the parts of life that are necessary for you to actually have success, like disappointment, failure, stress. And that's not even the main problem. Although it knows how to measure data, it doesn't know how to measure your God. It doesn't know how to factor God into the equation. In fact, the concept of God is actually threatening to this voice because it can't control the God factor. How can it conceptualize that God chose you despite your flaws and shortcomings, or that God's strength is made perfect in your weakness? It doesn't know that dependence on God and not having it all together puts you in a position to receive more from Him. That God allows challenging situations in your life to elevate you and transform you to be more like Him. The rejection was already ordained to take place. It had nothing to do with something being wrong with you. This voice within you, it's clueless when it comes to the power of the Holy Spirit to enable you to do the tasks that are in front of you, or the Holy Spirit's ability to open your eyes to have insight and foresight as to what's to come. To be honest, this voice, it's like a mini antichrist within you. It creates confusion, delay, fear, doubt. Wants you to see your situation as if there isn't a living and personal God who can help you. And I know that might sound extreme, but that it's actually that serious. It really is one of the hardest voices to overcome, because this voice, it's so logical, so calculated. And frankly, it would actually be somewhat helpful if God didn't exist. All the calculations would make sense. It's why you and I have actually submitted to it at some point in our lives. But here's the thing. When we do, if I can be honest with you, it's as if we're in agreement with the voice that the God factor doesn't matter. Now, I don't think you believe that, but your actions reflects the conditions of your heart, which is where that voice resides. This voice, along with every other unhealthy voice within you, it produces fruit. So if you were to picture yourself as a tree, how much of your fruit is connected to this deceiving voice? Meaning, think about your behaviors, your patterns, your thoughts, and assess how much of those things are directly or indirectly influenced by the imposter syndrome. Kai, there's so many things I want to say to that voice within you, but first, I'm going to ask you to do something really strange. You ready? I want you to start with thanking that voice. I know, sounds crazy. I know. But I want you to do it for two reasons. Reason number one is that voice has served as a reminder to you that you do have weaknesses, therefore you will forever need to depend on God. And that is a good thing. Secondly, I want you to thank that voice for helping you to become more aware. Aware of what? Well, that you're still dependent on what people think of you. And awareness is 50% of what's needed for change to take place. So this voice is actually opening your eyes to see what needs to be addressed. Now, how did I conclude that you're being limited by people pleasing? Well, if we go back to the original definition we went over earlier, the second half mentioned the fear of what people will find out. You see, when you're not bound to what people think, you're less likely to be concerned about what they will find out. We know that Scripture tells us in Galatians 1:10 that it's impossible to serve God and please man. But okay, maybe this isn't you. Perhaps what the voice is bringing to your awareness is more so that you may have some pride that says, if I can't be in control, I'm not doing it. If I'm not the best, if I don't know everything ahead of time, I'm not taking the next step. And although this may sound like you're operating in the spirit of excellence, more often than not, it's pride and or control. When you are starting to question whether you are enough, whether you can do the things that God has put in your hands to do, and you conclude that you are not, then you likely are one that likes control. You enjoy independence, you prefer predictability, and you want to be the best. And I think I just described most people. That was me for many years. If this is you, it's time for a cleanse. It's time to take a dose of castor oil for the soul because something is off. Just 2 teaspoons, you'll be good to go. Just kidding. All right, so now that we've discussed reasons to thank this voice, because when something is brought to your awareness, you have the power to change it. But now that we've thanked the voice, we need to destroy it. All right, so we have to destroy this thing because it's not useful. It's possible that it's deceived you into thinking you need it because it's going to keep you humble. But ultimately, it's just creating an atmosphere within you of shame and fear. And to add to the layers of deception, we know that humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. So you can choose humility. You don't need a toxic voice to help you do that. It's always interesting, though, to explore what makes it possible for these voices to get comfortable within us and stick around. And most of the time, it's our mindset. If you uproot the voice, but your mindset doesn't change, it can return because the environment within you is still conducive for that voice to exist within you. So what mindset creates the atmosphere for this voice? Well, let's start with the fallacy of perfection. Now, I can see why the voice would expect you to be perfect, or you got to know all the answers. You need to be able to predict what's next. But you having that expectation of yourself, how is that even possible? I mean, you've been making mistakes since you were born. You've never known everything that was going to happen next, but you've kept living. You know failure is not the end, but a great learning opportunity. Nothing about your life is perfect. So who bewitched you into taking on that belief that you have to be perfect? I mean, even the people who pretend to be, it's very obvious that they aren't. So I know you aren't trying to meet their expectations. So I don't know. I'm not sure what your specific reason is, but I will say that this belief will make it very welcoming for the imposter voice to stick around. So how can you shift this belief? Well, you can start by asking some real questions like, what can I do, or what can be done to me that God can't redeem me from, heal, and or restore? Taking time to think about that question and see if you can come up with anything. Most of the time we can't. And even when we make a list, which if you can, you should, but as you continue to explore your list and look at it like, is that situation actually too big for God? 100% of the time, the answer is no. As I was leading a small group of middle school girls recently, we were talking about trusting God, and they were adamant that there are some things that God just can't help you with. Yeah, I mean, adamant. And as we were talking through this, I realized this is not just the mindset of middle school girls. This is the mindset of many Christians. So I'm going to ask you honestly, is there anything impossible for God? When He said that all things will work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to His purpose, what is on your list that He didn't consider? What about your husband, your children? How about that sickness you've been dealing with? I mean, I know the list goes on of all the real issues that have been in your face every day, causing them to be magnified over God's truth. And guess who else knows? That AI voice. It's factored in all of those things, which is again why You feel like what's been on your heart to do won't work. Why changing careers at this point doesn't make sense. Moving across country isn't practical. Writing that book, starting that nonprofit on top of everything else just isn't realistic. These are all the challenges that come to mind that cause you to shy away from those things that God has called you to do and to question if you're qualified. Let's take it a little bit deeper. You don't trust yourself to walk with God. Or maybe you don't trust God to take care of you. It's much easier for you to do what you can control the best way you know how and just live with the results. You're not alone in that. It's been happening to so many people since the garden. The problem is when you take that approach, you are then 100% responsible for the outcome. Whereas when it's His will, it's His bill. He's responsible for how it turns out. When it's in your own strength, you better have a reliable system to keep yourself moving forward. When it's His strength you rely on, He has an everlasting supply. That belief that it's all on you, it's making it very comfortable for that imposter syndrome to hang around. Let me be a little cliche-y for a second. We have to learn to let go and let God do His thing. You are not the owner of your spouse, your children, your career, or your calling. God has never used perfect people, and your destiny isn't just yours. It's connected to mine and hers and His. You have your plans, but putting them in God's hands takes the burden off you and makes it easier for God to do whatever it is that He wants to be done. Yes, I know you put a lot of effort into starting that organization, but it might not be God's will for you to finish what you started. That may be someone else's calling. You might have been the person to start and, someone else comes in to manage it and or to take over. I know it was something that you birthed, but the baby, it belongs to Him. It has nothing to do with your worth, your qualifications. It all boils down to His plan and His purpose. This truth is really hard because we're taught to think of ownership. Take responsibility from the beginning to the end. Even more so, so many people have invested so much of themselves that you begin to believe that you not only own what God has put into your hands, but your sense of identity and sense of worth is rooted in what He put in your hands to do. To you, it feels like it's actually your reputation that is on the line. But you're wrong. You are His child. You reflect Him. It's actually His reputation that is on the line. Now, this is not, saying let's not care or let's not do our best with what He gives us, because that would just be bad stewardship. But what I am saying is that by changing your beliefs from ownership to stewardship, that's going to shift your atmosphere for that imposter syndrome to not be able to grow. Let me also say this as well. There's nothing wrong with sharpening your skills, growing in knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. But when that becomes your list of requirements before you can be obedient and take the next step of faith, then you are operating from a place of ownership. You are no longer walking with God. You've put yourself in charge. This is when anxiety is through the roof, self-doubt creeps in. It's when your body begins to tense up. You're going 1,000,000 miles a minute because it's all on you, and if you don't do it, then what? This is when your peace is based on external things and your joy begins to dwindle. The sad part is you're doing all these things, but you won't finish the race because you weren't designed to do it in your own strength and your own capacity. We have to root our identity in Jesus. And maybe this is bringing a truth to your attention that you're still not firmly rooted in Him. And it's okay, don't get down or overwhelmed by all this. He knows where you are and what you need. you're now increasing in your awareness, and perhaps you now have the energy and time and space to start working on these things, but your life, it's not your own. When you embrace and accept that truth, you will look at everything differently. Your problems are not your own, your victories, your shortcomings, your resources. If you believe that it is your own, then those voices of fear will continue to drive and lead you down a path of avoidance, fear, and doubt. I've become so hypersensitive to this voice that every time it wants to return, I try to remind myself that all this belongs to Jesus. Try doing the same. I want to encourage you to take on a posture of faith and trade places with Jesus on the boat. Take his place and take a nap while you're in the storm and let him take care of the storm. You're on the boat because of him. You're in the storm, which he can control. Relax. Have the faith to take a nap. Now, I'm not saying that we should sleep our way through life, but in every situation, there is a posture of faith. That posture might be a nap. Sometimes it's crying out to Jesus in prayer. Sometimes it's doing things without all the answers or speaking life over your situation. There is always a posture of faith. Whether you like it or not, you're chosen. You have a calling on your life. And that AI voice that we were talking about earlier, it is about to get the ultimate reboot. Upload truth to your system and let the voice of faith and trust take root in your foundation. Alrighty, you guys know what time it is. This is the time where we get to discuss a phrase, pattern, or belief that has been a hindrance to many in the culture. And if we eradicate it, it will improve your life, your family, and the community. It's chain breaking time. The behavior pattern that we are addressing this week is minimizing a compliment. You do realize that there are many things in this world that will directly or indirectly tear you down. We need to embrace those moments where someone is encouraging us or trying to build us up. I know it can feel awkward and hard to accept their words, but it is so vital that you don't allow their words to fall to the ground. It's not humble to minimize your strengths or something great that a person takes time to identify in you. It's actually rude. Receive those compliments graciously and with gratitude. It's supposed to make you feel good. It's okay to smile and hold your head up higher because someone spoke life-giving words to you. No, we don't want to become dependent on what others say, but God calls us to edify each other, which is to build each other up, to encourage one another. You enjoy when you can use your gifts to help others. Allow others to use their gifts on you. It's the way God designed it to be. So let's stop downplaying or minimizing the compliments that others give us, and let's respond with a thank you, I appreciate it, I receive. Let me close this out with a word of encouragement. You can't do it all, but he can. You're missing some of the qualifications, but he's not. You will make mistakes. He's got you covered. You got this. But always remember, it's only because he's got you. You were graced to do what God has placed in your hands. No one carries your grace like you do. As you fulfill all that God has called you to do, we will all benefit. Your time is now. Your season is now. Today. Until next time, shalom.